The research station floated quietly in space, orbiting a massive gas giant called Helios 7. Inside the station, everything was normally peaceful and organized. Commander Thex was a tall alien with blue scales covering his body and 4 bright amber eyes. He ran the station with strict rules and careful planning. His species, the Vralians, were known throughout the galaxy for being logical and efficient. They didn't waste time on emotions or unnecessary things. The station had about 40 Vralian workers who studied stars and planets. They collected data, ran experiments, and sent reports back to their home world. Everything followed a schedule. Wake time, work time, meal time, rest time, nothing ever changed. Nothing ever went wrong until 3 days ago. In a special area of the station called the Creche, 4 young Vralians lived together. The cubs were named Pip, Cree, Nix, and Voss. Their parents worked on different planets and stations far away, so the cubs stayed here where other adults could watch them. This was normal for Vralians. Cubs were raised by the community, not just by parents. It was efficient and logical. The cubs were small, about the size of earth dogs. They had soft gray scales that would turn darker as they grew older. Their eyes were bigger than adult eyes, and they made little chirping sounds when they played. Usually they were quiet and well-behaved. They played with their learning toys, ate their meals on time, and went into their rest pods without any trouble. But 3 days ago, something changed. It started at night cycle when the cubs were supposed to sleep. The rest pods were small, comfortable spaces where each cub would curl up and rest for 8 hours. But that night, none of the cubs would go inside. They stood by the window instead, pressing their small faces against the thick glass. They stared out at the docking bay where ships came and went. The caretaker, a female Vralian named Mora, tried everything. She adjusted the temperature in the pods. She played soft sounds. She offered favorite foods. Nothing worked. The cubs just stood at the window and made a strange sound. It wasn't their normal chirping. It was something else. Something urgent and sad. Mora called for help. Medical Officer Doran arrived with his scanning equipment. He checked each cub carefully. Their bodies were healthy. Heart rates normal. No sickness, no injury. But they wouldn't stop staring out the window. They wouldn't eat. They wouldn't play. They just waited. By the second day, Commander Thex was worried. The cubs had barely eaten anything. They took small sips of water but refused all food. They stood at the window in a group, sometimes chirping that strange sound, sometimes just silent and watching. When Mora tried to pull them away, they fought back. Little Voss even bit her hand, which had never happened before. Thex contacted experts on the home world through subspace communication. He described the behavior and sent medical scans. The experts had no answers. They suggested checking for toxic gases, radiation leaks, and psychological trauma. Thex checked everything. The station was perfectly safe. Nothing had changed in the cubs' environment. Nothing had happened to upset them. On the 3rd day, the cubs stopped making most sounds. They just stood there staring. Their eyes looked empty and sad. Medical Officer Doran warned that if they didn't eat soon, they would need feeding tubes. But even that might not work if the cubs were giving up on living. Thex stood in the creche watching the 4 small bodies pressed against the window. His logical mind couldn't understand this. There was no reason for this behavior. No explanation. He felt something strange in his chest. Something Vralians didn't usually feel. Was this what other species called worry? Fear? Little Voss turned her head and looked at him. Her big eyes seemed to be asking for something. But what? What did they want? Then Thex had a thought. It wasn't logical. It made no sense. But he had it anyway. The cubs were waiting for something. Or someone. He went to his office and sat down at his communication panel. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he started searching through the galactic database. He looked at species known for working with young ones. Species that were good at helping others. His search kept showing one result over and over. Humans. Thex didn't know much about humans. They were a young species new to space travel. Their technology was basic compared to most galactic races. They were weak physically. They lived short lives. Most advanced species didn't pay much attention to them, but the database said humans were good at one thing. They were good at caring for others. They had jobs called teachers and nurses and social workers. They had a word, empathy, that meant feeling what others felt. They seemed to specialize in helping those who were hurt or scared or alone. Thex made a decision. It wasn't logical. He had no proof it would work. But the cubs were dying, and nothing else had helped. He sent a message to the nearest human transport ship. It was called the Songbird, and it was passing through a nearby system. The message was simple. Urgent situation. Human presence requested. No details available. To his surprise, they agreed immediately. A human named Yunde changed his travel plans and turned his ship toward the station. He would arrive in 18 hours. Thex went back to the creche to tell Mora, but when he entered the room, he stopped and stared. All 4 cubs were active again. They were jumping around, making excited chirping sounds. They ran back to the window and pressed against it even harder than before. Mora looked at Thex with confusion in her eyes. Commander, they just suddenly became active. About 5 minutes ago. I don't understand what changed. Thex felt cold despite the warm station air. 5 minutes ago was exactly when he had received confirmation that Yunde was coming. But there was no way the cubs could know that. They had no access to communication systems. They couldn't understand languages. They were just children, yet somehow they knew. They knew someone was coming. They knew help was on the way. For the first time in his long career, Commander Thex felt something that his logical species rarely experienced. He felt genuine fear, because this situation was impossible, and impossible things were supposed to be exactly that. Impossible. The cubs chirped and pressed their faces to the window, staring at the empty docking bay where, in less than 1 day, a human ship would arrive. They knew. Somehow they had always known. Yunde sat in his small ship and wondered what he was getting into. The message from the Vralian station had been strange and urgent. He had been on his way to visit his sister Hana on Earth. He hadn't seen her in 2 years. But when the call came, he didn't hesitate. Someone needed help, so he went. That was just how Day was built. He was a xenobiologist, which meant he studied alien life forms. He had worked with many different species over the years. He had seen strange things and learned weird facts, but he had never worked with Vralians before. They usually kept to themselves and didn't ask for help from anyone, especially not from humans. As his ship approached the station, Day checked the information he had. The station studied stellar phenomena. It had a small crew, and it had 4 young Vralians in some kind of distress. That was all he knew. No details about what was wrong or why they needed him specifically. The Songbird docked smoothly at the station's bay. Day gathered his medical kit and sample cases, then stepped through the airlock. A massive Vralian was waiting for him. The alien stood over 7 feet tall, with deep blue scales that reflected the station lights. 4 amber eyes studied Day carefully. Human Day, the Vralian said through a translator device. I am Commander Thex, thank you for coming. I know this was sudden. Not a problem, Day said, trying not to feel tiny next to this huge alien. What's the emergency? Thex's scales rippled in a way Day couldn't interpret. It is difficult to explain. Please follow me. As they walked through the station corridors, Day noticed something odd. Every Vralian they passed stopped and stared at him. Not with hostility, but with intense curiosity, and something that might have been relief. Some of them whispered to each other in their own language, too quick for the translator to catch. Commander, Day said carefully, why does everyone seem so interested in me? Because, Thex replied, you are the answer to something we do not understand. They reached a door marked with symbols, Day's translator read as Youth Care Center. Thex paused before opening it. The cubs have not eaten in 3 days, Thex explained. They have barely slept. They refused all comfort and care. They simply stood at the window waiting. We tried everything. Nothing helped. Then I sent for you and they became active again. Excited. They knew you were coming before we told them anything. That's impossible, Day said. Yes, Thex agreed. But it happened. And now I need you to see something. The door opened. Day stepped into a large, comfortable room filled with soft surfaces and learning toys. Near the window, 4 small gray creatures turned to look at him. They were like miniature versions of Thex, but their scales were softer and their eyes much larger. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the smallest one, Voss, made a sound like a bell ringing. She scrambled across the floor faster than Day expected and launched herself at his legs. Before he could react, she was climbing up his body like he was a tree. She settled into his arms, wrapped her small arms around his neck, and made a deep, satisfied purring sound. Oh, Day said. automatically adjusting his hold to support her weight. "Hello there!" The other 3 cubs rushed forward. Pip climbed up his back. Kree and Nix grabbed his legs and held on tight. Within seconds, Day was covered in warm, scaly bodies, all of them making that same purring sound. He looked at Thex helplessly. "What do I do?" "I do not know," Thex admitted. "This has never happened before." A female Vralian hurried into the room. She carried scanning equipment and looked both excited and confused. "I am Dr. Nari Bin, the station's xenopsychologist. I need to scan you all immediately." "This is unprecedented." Day stood very still while Dr. Bin waved various devices around him and the cubs. The cubs didn't seem to care about the scanning. They just clung to him, their small bodies relaxing more and more. Voss's eyes started to close. Within minutes, all 4 cubs were asleep. "They are actually sleeping," Mora, the caretaker, whispered from the doorway. "For the first time in 3 days. Can someone please explain what's happening?" Dai asked quietly, trying not to wake the cubs. Dr. Bin gestured for him to sit down on a soft platform. Day carefully lowered himself and the cubs adjusted their positions but stayed asleep. Bin pulled up her scan results on a holographic display. "Cubs do not bond with other species," Bin explained. "They barely tolerate adults outside their immediate family. Yet these 4 have bonded with you instantly and completely. Their stress hormones have dropped to normal levels. Their brain activity shows deep contentment. And this happened the moment you entered the room." "But why?" Day asked. "I've never met them before. I didn't do anything special." "That is what we need to discover," Thex said. He looked at the sleeping cubs with an expression Day was starting to recognize as confusion. "Can you stay for a while?" "We need to study this." "I can stay," Day agreed, "but I'm not sure how much help I'll be. I don't know anything about Vralian cubs." Over the next hours, something became very clear. The cubs would not let Day leave. Every time he tried to set them down or move away, they woke up and became distressed. When he stayed with them, they were calm and happy. They started eating again, but only if Day was sitting nearby. They played with their toys but kept checking to make sure he was still there. Thex made a decision. He sent messages to 2 other humans who were relatively close to the station. Han Tai was an engineer working in the mining colonies. Choi Rin was a cargo pilot delivering supplies to nearby systems. Both agreed to come to the station. When Tay arrived the next day, the cubs accepted him immediately. They divided their attention between Day and Tay, chirping happily. When Rin arrived 6 hours later, the same thing happened. The cubs treated all 3 humans like beloved family members. Tay, who was good with his hands, started building things for the cubs. He made simple toys from spare station parts. A rolling ball with lights inside. A puzzle box that made sounds. The cubs loved everything he made. Rin taught them a human game. She clapped her hands in a pattern and sang a simple song. The cubs watched carefully, then tried to copy her. Their small hands couldn't clap the same way, but they tried. They chirped along with the song in their own way. Dr. Bin recorded everything. She ran more scans. She compared data. And slowly, she started to understand something that would change everything. "The cubs are communicating on a frequency we cannot hear," Bin explained to the group that evening. "It is below Vralian hearing range. We never knew they could do this because adults cannot detect it, but humans can respond to it. Not consciously, but your biology reacts to their call." "So they were calling for help," Rin said, "and somehow knew we would hear it." "More than that," Bin said quietly. "They called for you before any humans were near this station. Before Commander Thex even thought to send for you. They called and you came." Day looked down at Voss, who was sleeping peacefully in his lap. "How is that possible?" "I do not know yet," Bin admitted. "But I intend to find out." Commander Thex watched the 3 humans with the 4 cubs. They looked so natural together, so right. And he realized something important. His species had been wrong about humans. Very wrong. Dr. Nari Bin hadn't slept properly in 5 days. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind kept working on the puzzle. The cubs and the humans. The impossible connection. The call that had been answered before it was even sent. She had converted one of the station's laboratories into a research center. Screens covered every wall, showing data streams, brain scans, frequency analyses, and comparison charts. Commander Thex had given her unlimited access to the station's resources and the galactic database. This was too important to ignore. On the 6th day, Bin called a meeting. Everyone gathered in the station's main conference room. Thex sat at the head of the table. Medical Officer Doran was there, along with Mora and 3 other senior staff members. The 3 humans sat together on one side. Day had Voss in his lap because the cub refused to be separated from him for long periods. The other cubs were in the creche with Mora's assistant, but they weren't happy about it. Bin brought up the first holographic display. It showed wave patterns in soft blue light. This is the frequency the cubs emit. It exists in a range below what Vralian adults can consciously hear. We knew cubs made sounds, but we thought they were just simple vocalizations. We were wrong. She changed the display. This frequency isn't random. It has structure, patterns. It's a communication method, but not like language. It's more basic than that, more primal. It's a distress call. Why would cubs have a distress call that adults cannot hear? Thex asked. That's what I asked myself, Bin said. So I looked at our evolutionary history. She pulled up images of ancient Vralians. They looked different from modern ones, smaller, less armored. 10,000 years ago, our species was different. We lived in family groups in caves and forests. Cubs stayed with parents and extended family. The group protected the young together. She showed more images, but as we evolved and developed technology, something changed. We became more logical, more independent. We developed science and space travel, and we lost something. We lost the ability to sense what our cubs needed on an emotional level. We can care for them physically, feed them, protect them, teach them, but the deep emotional connection, that faded away. Day shifted Voss slightly. The cub made a small sound but stayed asleep. So the cubs kept the ability to call for help, but adults lost the ability to hear it? Exactly, Bin said. It's an evolutionary mismatch. The cubs are signaling in a language we've forgotten. And that brings me to humans. The hologram changed to show human brain scans. Bin highlighted several areas in bright colors. Human brains have large, highly active regions dedicated to empathy and emotional bonding. These areas are much bigger than in most species. They're also more sensitive. She showed comparison scans. Human brains next to Vralian brains, then several other species. Most spacefaring species have reduced these areas over time. As we became more advanced and technological, we became less emotionally driven. It made us more efficient, better at logic and problem solving. But humans kept these empathic centers. They stayed large and active. Why? Tay asked. Wouldn't that be inefficient? You would think so, Ben agreed. But I researched human history. Your species evolved in a very specific way. You raised children in groups. Not just parents, but grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighbors, and friends. Any adult in your community would help care for any child. You call it cooperative breeding. Rin nodded slowly. We do have a saying. It takes a village to raise a child. Exactly. And to make that work, you needed to feel empathy for children that weren't genetically yours. You needed to care about them. Protect them, feed them, comfort them when they were scared. Your entire species is built around the idea of caring for the young, regardless of whose young they are. Bin pulled up more data, and here's where it gets interesting. Human brains don't just have empathy for human children. These brain regions activate when you see any young creature in distress, baby animals, alien cubs, anything that displays youth and vulnerability. You're hardwired to respond to it. Doran leaned forward, studying the scans. Are you saying humans can hear the cub's distress call? Not hear it exactly, Bin corrected, but respond to it. The frequency the cubs emit triggers a reaction in human neural patterns. It's not conscious. The humans don't know they're receiving a signal, but their brains respond automatically with care and protection behaviors. Thex's scales rippled through several colors. This explains why the cubs bonded with them immediately, but it doesn't explain how the cubs knew to call for humans specifically. How did they know 3 days before we sent for D that a human would come? Bin took a deep breath. This is where my research enters theoretical territory. But I have a hypothesis. She brought up quantum probability models that made everyone's heads hurt just looking at them. The cubs weren't just sending a signal through space, Bin explained. I believe they were sending it through time, or more accurately, through probability fields. They were calling out into quantum possibility space for the outcome where someone capable of helping would arrive. That's impossible, Doran said flatly. 3 days ago, we all thought it was impossible for cubs to bond with another species, Bin countered. Yet here we are. The cubs called out for help. They didn't know what a human was. They just knew they needed someone who would care, someone who would answer, And somehow, across light years and probability, they found Day. Day looked down at the sleeping cub in his arms. "You're saying she reached out across the universe and pulled me here?" "I'm saying she and the others sent out a call that rippled through quantum possibility until it found a universe where someone answered. And in this universe, that someone was you." The room fell silent. It was too big to fully understand, too strange to accept easily, but the evidence was right there in front of them. The cubs had known, they had called, and the humans had come. Tay spoke up quietly. "If this is true, what does it mean?" "It means," Bin said slowly, "that humans might be uniquely suited to help young creatures across the galaxy. Not just Vralian cubs, any species whose young need emotional care and connection. You're the galaxy's caregivers, the ones who hear the calls that others miss." "That's a big responsibility," Rin said. "Yes," Thex agreed, "but perhaps it is also a gift. We have spent centuries measuring worth by strength and technology. Maybe we have been measuring the wrong things." Bin pulled up one final display. It showed message logs from across the galactic network. "I've been contacted by 17 different species since word spread about what happened here. They all have similar situations, young ones in distress, developmental problems, trauma, and they're all asking the same question." She looked at the three humans. "Can you help?" Day met Tay's eyes, then Rin's. He saw the same thing in their faces that he felt in his chest. Fear and uncertainty, yes, but also something else, a sense of rightness, of purpose. "We can try," Day said simply, and he meant it. The first ship arrived 2 days after Bin's presentation. It was a Metharian vessel, beautiful and strange, made of crystal that sang when solar winds touched it. The Metharians themselves were crystalline beings, their bodies formed from living mineral that thought and felt and moved. They communicated through light pulses that the translator struggled to interpret properly. 3 Metharian elders came aboard the station. They brought with them 3 juveniles, each about the size of a human child, their crystal bodies dim and lifeless. The elders explained through careful light pulses that the juvenile's parent unit had fragmented in an asteroid collision 3 months ago. Since then, the young ones had stopped responding to anything. They wouldn't communicate, wouldn't move unless forced. They were slowly going dark, which meant they were dying. Commander Thex looked at Day, who looked at Tay and Rin. They held a quick, quiet conversation in the corner of the docking bay. "I know rocks better than people," Tay said. "I'm an engineer. I work with mining equipment, and I'm a pilot," Rin added. "I deliver cargo." "Neither of us trained for this." "Neither did I," Day admitted. "I study alien life, but I've never been a therapist or a teacher." "But they came all this way. We have to try." Rin nodded slowly. "Okay, but if I mess this up—" "You won't," Day said with more confidence than he felt. "Just do what feels right." The Metharian juveniles were placed in a specialized chamber that maintained the high temperature their bodies needed. Rin volunteered to go in first. She suited up in heat-resistant gear and entered the chamber carrying a small tablet loaded with images and videos. For the first hour, she just sat there. The 3 juveniles stood motionless in their designated spots, their crystalline forms barely glowing. Rin didn't try to touch them or make them move. She just talked. She talked about space, about the stars she had visited, about the beautiful nebula she had flown through once that looked like a flower made of fire. She showed them pictures on her tablet, images of Earth and its oceans, videos of birds flying, recordings of music. The juveniles didn't respond. Rin kept talking anyway. She told them about her childhood on Earth, about learning to fly, about getting lost once in a cargo bay and being scared until someone found her. She told them it was okay to be scared. It was okay to be sad. After 2 hours, one of the juveniles turned slightly. Just a small movement, but Rin saw it. She kept talking. She told them stories about other species she had met, about a time she helped rescue a ship full of traders from a solar flare, about how scared everyone was, but how they all worked together. After 3 hours, the same juvenile took a step closer. Then another. Rin stayed very still. The juvenile came close enough that she could see the intricate patterns inside its crystal structure, beautiful geometric formations that caught the light. "You're very pretty," Rin said softly. "I bet your parent was proud of you." The juvenile pulsed once. A dim flash of light. Communication. It was the first sign of life any of the juveniles had shown in 3 months. By the time Rin left the chamber 4 hours later, All three juveniles were actively communicating with small light pulses. They had moved closer to where she had been sitting. One of them had even touched the tablet she left behind. The Metharian elders were stunned. They asked if Rin could return the next day. She agreed. Over the next week, she spent 4 hours each day with the juveniles. She taught them about different types of stars, about ships and flying, about Earth and humans and all the wonderful things in the galaxy. The juveniles grew brighter each day. Their light pulses became stronger and more complex. They were healing. While Rin worked with the Metharians, more ships arrived. A Quarian vessel brought larvae that refused to pupate. These were worm-like creatures with tentacles, intelligent and sensitive, but stuck in a developmental stage they should have passed months ago. The delay was killing them slowly. Han Tai took this case. He wasn't sure why he felt drawn to it, but something about the larvae reminded him of machines that wouldn't quite work right. They needed the right conditions, the right encouragement. He sat with the larvae in their humid chamber night after night. He brought his engineering tools and showed them how things were built, how pieces fit together, how something could transform from one thing into another. He showed them videos of Earth insects going through metamorphosis. Caterpillars becoming butterflies, larvae becoming beetles. You're scared, Tay said to them one night. Changing is scary. Becoming something new means leaving behind what you were. But you know what? The new version is still you, just different, just grown. He told them about his own life, about leaving Earth to work in the mining colonies, about being terrified the first time he went into deep space, about how he almost turned around and went home. But he didn't, he kept going. And he became someone new, someone he was proud of. The larvae listened. Tay wasn't sure how he knew they were listening, but he did. He could feel their attention on him, their fear and uncertainty, their slow-building courage. On the 8th night, one larva began pupating. The others followed within hours. Tay watched the process with tears in his eyes, though he wouldn't admit that to anyone. More species came. The Vocari brought children who had survived a plague but stopped speaking. The Terrians brought orphans who refused to bond with new families. The Kelson brought young ones who had developmental delays that no medical treatment could fix. Day and the others did their best with each case. Sometimes they succeeded dramatically. Sometimes they made small progress. Sometimes they just sat with the young ones and offered comfort, but in every case something helped. Some change occurred. The young ones responded to humans in ways they wouldn't respond to their own species. Dr. Nari Bin documented everything. Her research papers spread through the galactic scientific community like wildfire. Everyone wanted to know about the humans and their impossible talent. Everyone wanted to understand this connection. Word reached the Galactic Council, the governing body that oversaw relations between spacefaring species. They sent observers to the station. The observers watched as Day worked with a traumatized Helian youngster who had witnessed its family die in a space accident. They watched Rin teach emotional expression through art to a group of Saurian youth who had no words for feelings. They watched Tay build confidence in young beings through problem-solving and creation. After 2 weeks of observation, the council made an announcement. They were establishing a new program, the Cross-Species Youth Welfare Initiative. Its purpose was to help young beings across the galaxy who needed special care, and they wanted humans to lead it. The station itself was renamed. It became Haven Station, a place where any species could bring their young ones who needed help. More humans were recruited from Earth and the colonies. Teachers, social workers, parents, counselors, artists, builders, anyone who had the capacity to care and the desire to help. Commander Thex watched his station transform from a quiet research outpost into a bustling center of cross-species care and learning. He watched humans work with species from across the galaxy. He watched young ones heal and grow and thrive under human guidance. One evening, he stood with Day in the observation dome. Voss was there too, now nearly adult-sized but still attached to Day. They watched the stars together in comfortable silence. I did not believe it at first, Thex said quietly, when the cubs would not stop calling, when they knew you were coming. I thought it was impossible. It was impossible, Day agreed, but it happened anyway. Your species has given us a great gift, Thex continued. You have shown us what we lost when we became too logical, too efficient. We forgot how to simply care. Day looked at the large alien beside him. You care, Commander. You cared enough to send for help when nothing else worked. You cared enough to let us try, even when it seemed crazy. Thex's scales rippled with colors Day had learned meant emotional depth. Perhaps there is hope for us yet. Below them, the station bustled with life. Human voices mixed with alien sounds. Young beings played and learned and healed. And somewhere in all of it, more calls were being answered. More young ones were finding the care they needed. The cubs had been right all along. Humans did come when called. They always would. 6 months had passed since Hyundai first arrived at what was now called Haven Station. The transformation was remarkable. What started as a small research station with 40 Vralian workers had become a thriving hub of cross-species cooperation. Over 200 beings now lived and worked on the station, representing 30 different species. And 40 humans had joined the staff. Day stood in his new office, looking at the wall covered with photographs. Children of every imaginable form, crystalline Metherians glowing with health, furry Kelson youngsters playing together, tentacled Quarian adolescents who had successfully completed pupation. Scaled, feathered, armored, and soft-bodied young ones from across the galaxy, every single one had been helped by a human caregiver. His door chimed. "Come in," Day called. Dr. Naribin entered, carrying a datapad and looking excited. Her scales were bright purple, which Day had learned meant she was happy. Over the months, he had gotten much better at reading Vralian expressions. "I wanted you to see the latest numbers," Bin said, pulling up charts on Day's desk display. "We've processed requests from 73 different species. Success rate of 89% for significant improvement in youth well-being. 97% for at least some measurable positive change." "That's incredible," Day said, though the numbers still amazed him every time he saw them. "How many humans are working in the field now?" 218, Bin replied. "Distributed across 47 stations and 12 homeworlds. And we have over 15,000 applications from humans who want to join the program. Your species has been remarkably enthusiastic about this work." Day smiled. "We like helping. It's what we do." "It's more than that," Bin said seriously. She set down her datapad and looked at him directly. "I've been studying this phenomenon for months now. The data is clear. Humans don't just help because it's a job or a duty. You help because you genuinely care. The young beings we work with can sense that. They respond to it. That authenticity is what makes the difference." "Have you figured out more about how the cubs called me?" Day asked. "The quantum probability thing?" "I have a theory," Bin said. "But you'll think it sounds strange." "Everything about this situation is strange," Day pointed out. "Tell me." Bin pulled up a complex diagram showing Earth's position in the galaxy relative to other spacefaring civilizations. Humans developed intelligence relatively late compared to most species. You also developed space travel much later. By the time your species left Earth, the galaxy already had thousands of established civilizations. Most of you felt like you arrived late to a party that had been going on for centuries. "That's true," Day agreed. "We're still considered a young species by galactic standards. But what if that timing wasn't an accident?" Bin suggested. "What if Earth's isolation and humanity's late arrival served a purpose? Look at the pattern. Most species develop technology and space travel, then lose their emotional empathy over generations. They become efficient and logical. But humans kept your empathy. You arrived in the galaxy with it fully intact." She changed the display to show evolutionary timelines. "Every other major species went through this transformation thousands of years ago. They forgot how to care deeply. They lost the ability to respond to emotional distress across species boundaries. But humans didn't. You kept something the rest of us discarded." "So you think the galaxy was waiting for us?" Day asked skeptically. "I think the universe has patterns we don't fully understand," Bin said carefully. "The cubs called out through quantum probability. They didn't know what they were calling for. They just knew they needed help. And somehow that call found the one species in the galaxy equipped to answer it. Does that sound like coincidence to you?" Day sat down slowly. "You're saying we evolved specifically to fill this role? I'm saying maybe your species kept empathy for a reason that's bigger than survival on one planet. Maybe you were always meant to be the ones who answer when the young and vulnerable call for help." Before Day could respond, his communicator chimed. It was Tay. "Day, you need to come to the main hall. Commander Thex is making an announcement. He says it's important." The main hall was packed when Day arrived. Humans stood among dozens of different species. Workers, scientists, caregivers, and visitors all gathered to hear what the commander had to say. Voss stood near the front with the other cubs, all of them now nearly adult-sized but still spending most of their time around humans. Commander Thek stood on the raised platform, his scales rippling through solemn colors. "I have received word from the Vralian Conclave. They have made a decision that affects all of us." The room fell silent. Thex continued. "For 300 years, the Conclave has evaluated species based on technology, military strength, and logical capability. By these measures, humans ranked low. Many in the Conclave did not understand why other species were so interested in working with humans. They saw your species as weak and overly emotional." Dave felt several humans around him shift uncomfortably. This wasn't news, but hearing it stated so bluntly still stung. "Today, the Conclave announced they were wrong," Thex said, his voice carrying weight and emotion. "They have reviewed the data from Haven Station and the Youth Welfare Initiative. They have studied Dr. Bin's research, and they have come to a new understanding." He paused, his four eyes scanning the crowd. "The Conclave now recognizes that strength comes in many forms. That advancement is not only measured in weapons and ships, that the ability to care across species boundaries is not a weakness but perhaps the rarest and most valuable trait in the galaxy." Thex's scale shifted to bright gold, which meant deep respect. Humanity has been granted full Galactic Council membership, not as junior partners, not as probationary members, but as full equals with voting rights and recognition as a vital species for galactic well-being. The room erupted. Humans hugged each other. Alien species made their own expressions of celebration. Day found himself grabbed by Rin and Tay in a tight group hug, all three of them laughing and crying at the same time. When the noise died down, Thex spoke again. "There is more. The Council has proposed something unprecedented. They want to establish the Human-Led Care Initiative as a permanent galactic institution. Humans will lead youth welfare efforts across all Council space. This is the first time in Council history that a single species has been given leadership of a pan-galactic program." Dr. Bin stepped forward. "This means guaranteed funding, official recognition, and support from every Council member species. It means human caregivers will be welcomed on every world. It means what we started here will expand beyond anything we imagined." Day felt Voss press against his leg. He looked down at the young Vralian who had started everything. She looked up at him with intelligent eyes. "You called for me," Day said softly, just to her. "You called and I came. And that changed everything." Voss made a soft chirping sound. Through the translator, her voice came clearly. "I called for whoever would care. The universe sent you. It sent all of you, because humans are the ones who answer." That evening, Day stood alone in the observation dome. He looked out at the stars, thinking about everything that had happened. 6 months ago, he had been a simple xenobiologist heading home to visit his sister. Now he was the director of a program that spanned the galaxy. His species had gone from being dismissed as weak to being recognized as essential. And it all started because 4 scared cubs had called out for help, and somehow knew that help would come. His communicator buzzed. It was a message from Earth. Thousands of new applications for the CARE initiative. Teachers, nurses, social workers, parents, artists, builders, counselors. Humans from every continent volunteering to go into space and help raise alien children. Day smiled. Of course they were volunteering. Because that's what humans did. When someone needed help, humans came running. It didn't matter if that someone was human or alien. It didn't matter if they looked different or spoke different languages or came from different worlds. If a child was scared or hurt or alone, humans would be there. Behind him, the door opened. Rin and Tay entered, followed by several other human workers. Then came Voss and the other cubs. Then Binthex and more Vralians. Then Metharians and Quarians and Kelson and members of a dozen other species. They all gathered in the dome together, looking out at the stars. "I've been thinking about what you said," Tay spoke up, addressing Bin. "About how maybe humans evolved this way for a reason. About how maybe the universe needed someone who would care." "And?" Bin asked. "I think you're right," Tay said. "But I think it's even simpler than quantum probability and evolution. I think the universe is full of young ones who get scared and hurt and lost. And the universe needed someone who would show up for them. Every single time. No matter what." "That's us," Rin added softly. "We're the ones who show up." Day looked around at his friends, his colleagues, his family. Human and alien, all working together. All caring for the young ones who needed them. The cubs refused to rest until we arrived, he said. Even the alphas didn't understand. But the cubs knew something the adults had forgotten. They knew that somewhere in the galaxy someone would hear their call. Someone would care enough to come. And you did, Voss said, pressing close to Day's side. You all did. You always will.